What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering with the double upload. Hey, if you missed my first video, I talked about some sweeping layoffs that are happening Monday and Tuesday at Activision, leading to hundreds of people being terminated. If you missed that video and everything that's going on, I will leave it linked in the pinned comment below. Hopefully, YouTube notifications may work and we can cover this one. Now, there is an absurd new tax proposed. Now, I've already talked about in Chicago the online services tax, the tax that they have on Netflix, Hulu, PlayStation, anything that's online, kind of like that, was getting taxed under their entertainment tax. Now we see an even more absurd tax proposed in Pennsylvania that is likely to pass based on a recent revision that it's had. And I want to first lay out some scientific evidence before I go into this tax, because I know that you know everything I'm about to say, but to show that there is factual evidence backing up my claims, I want to share with you some reports. Researchers at University of York have found no evidence to support the theory that video games make people more violent. In a series of experiments, more than 3,000 participants, the team demonstrated that video game concepts do not prime players to behave in certain ways, and that increasing the realism of violent video games does not necessarily increase aggression in players. The dominant model of learning in-game is built on the idea that exposing players to concepts such as violence in video games makes those concepts easier to use in real life. This is known as priming, and is thought to lead to changes in behavior. Previous experiments on this effect, however, so far provided mixed conclusions. Researchers at University of York expanded the number of participants and experiments studied have been gone for it and compared to different types of gaming realism to explore whether more conclusive evidence could be found. In one study, participants who played a game where they had to either be a car avoiding collisions with trucks or a mouse avoiding being caught by a cat. Following the game, the players were shown various images, such as a bus or a dog, asked to label them as either a vehicle or animal. That's not really the important part. The important part is no link. Here's another report. In response to a recent issue in Parkland, the president, Donald Trump, met with the video game manufacturers to debate whether or not their products incite real-world violence. Critics of the transparent attempt to deflect attention from the real problem, the easily availability of firearms, but much research suggests playing such games can increase aggressive behavior away from video console. In 2015, American Psychological Association Task Force concluded as much. That said, this issue is far from settled. A newly released study finds players playing games no long-term ill effects, at least among adults. This finding stands in contrast to some experimental studies, writes a research team led by Simone Kuhn of the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. So essentially, we've had several reports run with no conclusive evidence one way or another whether it has an effect. Obviously, I believe that it has no effect whatsoever. It's like to say that a crazy person, somebody who does something terrible, drinks water, and we all drink water. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people play video games, okay? Activision made $8 billion last year selling mostly games like Call of Duty, all right? The numbers of people that are adversely affected by that game, if it were a direct relation, this country would be untenable, okay? However, Pennsylvania boomers officials propose a sin tax on violent video games. Video games could get even more expensive than their family-friendly counterparts as futurist Pennsylvania lawmakers attempt to add a sin tax to titles rated M by the ESRB. This proposal would see an extra money fund a new board dedicated to the safety of school safety in the digital age, hoping to prevent school issues. All right. So essentially, we're back in the 90s. All right. Government statements have regularly linked tragedies with video games, but really have no evidence. Quinn's initial bill failed to gain much traction, but with minor alterations, the proposed bill, House Bill 109, wants to add a 10% sin tax on top of standard local taxes. Although the tax can vary, this is added on top of Pennsylvania's 6% tax and would see a $60 game raise anywhere between $65 and $70. Now that's if you're not buying the Super Ultra Mega Timmy Edition for $200, then you're talking about adding an extra $20. Presuming that the cost would ultimately fall on the customer. Of course they would. This would help form and maintain digital protection for school safety account, which would oversee measures in Pennsylvania school districts. All right. Again, at the end, Kit Guru says, with no evidence linking a rise in aggression from violence in media to incidents including real-life violent behavior, it's difficult to see the possibility that video games are being, it's difficult to see beyond the possibility that video games are being used as a scapegoat for underlying issues. Alongside more research into the matter, I'd personally like to see governments across the globe bolster their understanding of technology and entertainment in the digital age before pushing for legislation. Essentially what we have here is a bunch of boomers that have never played video games still looking for more money. Now, a sin tax is something that's traditionally applied to, for example, alcohol or tobacco products. And while you could argue that they're unfair, the government justifies this by saying, well, you don't need these things to live. In fact, they're bad for you. So this is a way to disincentivize people from doing it, when we all really know the reason they do it is monies. All right. If they were to apply this 10% successfully, if you're young, this may sound foreign or your eyes might gloss over on the way taxes work. But essentially, let me give you a short story. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I love the Milwaukee Brewers, our baseball team. I was against the 5-county stadium tax, which essentially taxed the taxpayers to pay for this new stadium. I thought there were better ways to do it, specifically looking at what we're doing with the local casinos in the area. Nonetheless, this tax happened. When it happened, my boomer dad told me, they'll never get rid of this tax. And I didn't understand what he meant at that time, but essentially what happened was they increased the tax by 0.5% to pay for this. And once the stadium was paid for, that tax never went away. Imagine that, right? Once you give the government money, they don't give it back, not willingly anyway. And when you talk about taxing particularly rated video games, I mean, an M rating might not just mean that a game is violent. It might have crude humor. It might have adult themes. Are you going to tax those? What if it's an educational video game that has an M rating? Are you going to tax that an extra 10%? I mean, these lawmakers are absurd. And every time, by the way, if you live in Virginia or you know people in Virginia, I highly recommend getting at least somewhat involved here. The bill calls for a 10% tax on any games rated mature 17 plus or adults only 18 plus. The bill calls for the establishment of the digital protection of school safety. Again, what they're really saying is we want more of the taxpayers' money for reasons. All right. There's no concrete scientific evidence linking people. Look, just because I play a racing game doesn't mean that I'm going to speed in real life. Just because you play SimCity doesn't mean you're going on to be, I don't know, God or into city planning, right? These things aren't always associated. Yes, you can have things in common. It's causation and correlation, right? They're not, just because you play a first-person shooter doesn't mean that you're going to be one in real life, okay? If that were true, you wouldn't be able to go out in public, right? If there's any real connection between the two. This is absurd. We fought back against this in the 90s. We fought back against this in the 2000s. Here we are in 2020, and out-of-touch boomer politicians, again, are trying to steal money from gamers to fund absurd programs that will have no real measurement, no real status to live up to, but will pay people some gigantic salary to sit on the board. All right? So, hey, if you are in this area, this is something you need to know. Make sure that you share this video around, because hopefully more people in Virginia will see it, because once they get money in Virginia, make no mistake about it, they're going to start doing it in your state, if you're at least in the United States, because governments look at that and they're like, well, that's free money for us to do things with that will never be regulated, that will never be held up to any standard, that will never compete against a private company that would probably do it much better and far cheaper, okay? So I hope you are enjoying a good video, a good day. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like on it. And I guess try to not be maniacs out there if you're playing any video games this weekend. You know, remember, it's video games. It's not real life.